Welcome to the diner. Come join us for a slice of mental pie. Not a feast, just a snack. A deep thought to chew on from a big, meaty book. It's mother culture served from a short order kitchen. Sit at the counter of our virtual diner and let us serve you a slice of pie. Mental pie. It'll go good with a cup of coffee, then you get your refreshed self back to the fray with a few new, beautiful thoughts to think. To kick off Season 3, we've invited Dr. Timothy Patitsas, author of The Ethics of Beauty, to come chat with us and share some of his ideas. We really enjoyed talking to him, and we know you'll enjoy listening to the conversation. Welcome to the diner. We have a very special episode in store for you today. We are pleased to have Dr. Timothy Patitsas, the author of The Ethics of Beauty, joining us today. Welcome, Dr. Patitsas.
Thank you so much for welcoming me. It's great to be here on the diner.
For those of our listeners who have been following us from the beginning of the podcast, his name will be familiar as the author of The Ethics of Beauty, which we've been talking about. I don't think we've talked about anything else yet, have we? But that's not the only thing he's ever done. So, Dr. Patitsas, will you please tell us a little about yourself generally, and then more specifically, if you would tell us how the book came to be?
Yeah, so, about myself more generally, well, I've been teaching ethics at the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology since 2005. So, just finishing 20 years now here. And the last 5 years, I was also the dean at Hellenic College, the undergraduate component of the Greek Orthodox Seminary. So that was a great experience. A wonderful faculty in Hellenic College also. So I really loved spending time with them. Although it was through the COVID era, which is was just rough for schools and everyone. Um, and then originally I'm from Northeast Ohio, and just grew up just a couple hundred yards from the Cuyahoga River, and then I went to undergrad at Georgetown, thinking that I would somehow be involved in the Cold War, and that ended. And and I ended up going to seminary after that, and then back to Washington for my PhD in theology. And that's where I fell in love with the work of Jane Jacobs. And pretty much most of my life since then has somehow been wrapped up with, what I think of her significance. But yeah, I mean, it's really not, it's not like a super impressive resume. I wrote one book, but I've enjoyed teaching. It is. I assume this is true of the other seminaries, but it's such holy ground, and it's a wild ride to teach in an environment like that.
Very spiritually intense, I bet.
It is. It's like intense spiritual warfare. There's ups and downs. But then, there's also that dimension of trying to think of, uh, like the first time you go to the Holy Sepulchre, like that somehow, it's just radiating something. Or the first time I went to the grave of Saint Sergius of Radonej in I think it's northwest of Moscow, where Rublev's Holy Trinity is now, and it's certain places are just beyond. They're very intense like that.
Well, right before we pressed record, we were talking about the patterns, Timeless Way of Building, Christopher Alexander. So what's the pattern in these holy places? Have you figured that out? Have you figured out what part of that pattern is that makes it feel the way it does? Can we
Gosh.
identify it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of a curtailment of human purpose. It, there is some other, there is, it is a divine purpose that's at work, and that I mean, the divine purpose is present everywhere we go, but somehow in many places you can push it aside, or it has more yield. And these places, it's solidified. There's a density to it, and so you're brought to your knees there. Maybe that's not a good answer, but
Well, if it was
it's
easy to
a
pin
good
down in
question.
words, right?
It's a really good question. Yeah. What is the pattern?
What is the pattern? If we don't know the answer, it's worth thinking about. What are the patterns that we see in these holy places, and how can we fractalize and repeat these patterns um, in our other environments? Because that's part of our in our work with homeschooling and everything. What we write about is internalizing these patterns and putting them in the home.
Yeah.
So, what kind of response have you had to Ethics of Beauty? I know you said, I only wrote one book, but it's like the book of the decade, and everybody's talking about it. So,
Yeah.
everybody who reads it says, this is the most important Orthodox book that's been written this decade. Everybody needs to read it. So, what's the reception been like?
You get occasional podcast invitations. I think it sort of sells in spurts. Like I don't know, what drives it. Maybe someone will mention it and they'll sell a couple, and then um, I don't. Most of the feedback I get is more along the lines of, this helped me make sense, in particular, of war trauma. That's the main thing. That some people say that somehow their traumatic experience, was lessened in the their the its holdover effects were lessened in the light of reading the book. Um, I talked to a guy who had done a couple tours in Afghanistan or something, and he was saying that how I can't remember what he I don't remember exactly, but somehow he came back and he was totally fine. He went through a tough time. He was totally healed, but he couldn't explain it to his priest what had happened. And then he read the Ethics of Beauty and he said, "Oh yeah, that's it." And then he could just talk about it, which was nice.
Gave him words to be able to describe what had
Yeah.
happened.
Well, your
Yeah, so
chapter on trauma was so timely because at the same time, there's this movement in the psychological community with like Gabor Mate and the people involved in his circle that have been talking about trauma. And we're also coming off of a historical period in America in particular, where our whole relationship with the war machine has really changed. It's really been challenged, and we can't rest in the patriotism of the past. And it's very difficult for a lot of people to navigate. And I imagine that you being able to articulate that for American soldiers is really profound. You offered something that nobody else has offered them, a way out.
Well, yeah, well, certainly, had I not read Jonathan Shea, and then to a lesser extent, but maybe more powerfully in terms of the confirmation, Bessel Bender Kolk's "The Body Keeps the Score," then I couldn't have. And then it's just a lot of getting lucky, like just happening to be reading Elder Porphyrios at the same time, and then one of my former instructors, Eric Pearl, who's a Neoplatonist, and looking at the role of the aesthetic in this continuum of cognition. So a lot of things came together quite naturally for me, and then the luck part of the luck was that Jane Jacobs, who's so important for me, I could see that her preference for a certain kind of science, the science of organized complexity, really is also a kind of beauty first approach to science. So I think that was since I talk about that in the final chapter of the book, there is kind of a humbling return in the final chapter to say that just as you need all three kinds of science, truth first or goodness first methods, I mean, those two as two separate things also have their place, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not really meant to be the primary place.
Right.
Um, and then really Cesar Millan, I have to just throw him in there before I
Yes.
forget him. I think I jokingly say he's the only therapist in America I trust, but his animal dog breed thing and seeing how that really is for us, that's human person, and no, that's animal human person, and that really is the progression of soul building as well as soul healing.
I love that. Caesar Milan as therapist, as beauty first therapist for America.
Yeah, he's phenomenal, that guy. I mean, he really is so intuitive about. Of course, a dog is a little bit easier,
Right.
but maybe not easier to a saint, because I think they're so deep that they bring out that animal side in us as well. Like they heal that animal side so directly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Bulgakov would say that, in that relationship with the dog, where um, is like hypostasizing the dog, right? So, like, Cesar Millan really does put that hierarchy into a framework where you can see how, the right relationship hypostasizes the dog out of, like, the crazy Chihuahua or, the violent German Shepherd, right?
Yeah, I mean, the dogs are out of their minds, and then there is like that sense of, I love that image of the Gadarene demoniac. The people came and found him clothed and in his right mind, and it is true that these encounters with holiness, put us back there, clothed and in our right minds.
One thing I noticed is that in the beginning of the book, you start it with the discussion of trauma, like we mentioned, which is a very individual and can be a very isolating type of experience, right? But then you end the book with the discussion of the city as liturgy, which is, as communal as it gets. And then in the middle, you have the chapter on gender, right? So, and I noticed that that's a chiastic structure, and I wondered if that was intentional or if it just kind of happened, and then you realized later, or.
Nothing about the book was intentional. I mean, it started because, Road to Emmaus needed a discussion, an interview about war, and I just decided to write it. I decided to write the questions and the answers just to save time, and it turned out so well that we continued with that. And then I had written 2 or 3 chapters before my sabbatical in 2014, and I decided to, well, just get this out of the way and then go to my main project. So I really spent just about 2 months or so working on it, and I didn't think chapters 4 and 5. I didn't think they were going to be part of it, and there was no plan. They just sort of came. And the biggest surprise for me in the book was the discussion of healthy shame. Before I wrote it, I'd never thought of it, and healthy shame is having this concentric structure from shyness to boldness to. Now that is something I get a fair amount of pushback. People say, you want us to feel ashamed of ourselves, but really, really, that healthy shame is, it ends in glory, and it ends in a perfect, freedom, and I don't think it's such a big deal, really.
It's just that everybody's so focused on the popular use of the term toxic shame that they have no framework to begin to understand it as something that God made that has a holy usability, that a holy use for it. And that's where this is where you brought the extra piece to the puzzle. Because if you're only looking at, like, popular psychology, like Brene Brown is an excellent example, you would get the impression that there's no use for shame at all and you should get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah, people think of toxic shame as saying like damned lies or something. It's really the toxic shame is toxic is the adjective, shame is the noun. So there is healthy shame, or if there's a crippling, destructive shame, there's also a healing, liberating shame.
Well, what was so illuminating for me too is that you tied it to the different kinds of love. Now, I wasn't raised Orthodox, so a lot of this stuff, a lot of ways of thinking about these things are still, they strike me in their novelty and everything. And the way the Orthodox understanding of agape and eros and philia, and then you putting that together with shame, all of it came together for me in a way that I have just never understood before. That this is how we love, that it's about boundaries and everything.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, it was just in the writing that I understood it, because you can see how eros leads to a certain kind of shyness,
Sure.
but God willing, it better unfold
Right.
into a certain kind of boldness, or
Right, right.
that's the end of the situation. And then just the freedom that comes with when two people love each other and are at rest in each other and are really, certainly have not ridiculed the shyness or
Right.
denigrated it, and have not ridiculed or denigrated the boldness, but
Mm-hmm.
are beyond, not beyond it, but it's unfolded into something even higher and transfigured.
It has a fullness to it. Something, it's more
Fullness.
full than it used to be. I love how you keep referencing in this talk here that, like, the act of writing this book kind of just like happened to you, because that's how Lisa and I felt about our Patterns for Life book. We were like, we're never going to be able to write this book, but then it happened. So we kind of came to a place where we identified that luck as like the action of the Holy Spirit. Did you kind of come to the same conclusion with your own book?
You know, I do think I've said this in a couple places, and I'm very cognizant of chaos within myself, and having someone to talk with, or someone who, a student in front of me, for example, is such salvation to leave the self behind and discover what I know
Yes.
that I wouldn't otherwise, and I guess that's the great thing about writing or creating. But yeah, I think the Holy Spirit, although I'll have to say the Holy Spirit, is tricky, right? Because it's not just like flow or something like a
No,
flow
not the
state.
same, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this current book I'm writing, I've been working on for over 10 years, and every time I go into that kind of flow state, it just leads me down a dead end. Like, it's so confusing because the matter is complicated, and I've had to fight much harder to tease out what it's really about. And I think it's going to be like a terrible book at the end, and I'll just be so glad when it's over. But it's I don't think it won't have. Well, the ethics of beauty is probably wordy, but it's not fake wordy. I mean, it really took me that much to get to the understanding of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was one thing that I really appreciated about it, because it was, the format kind of felt like you were having a conversation with the reader. And it kind of just unfolded bit by bit instead of being an already, a concise explanation, without extra room for conversation. And so it was, Laura and I have compared it to kind of like drinking from a fire hose, because there's so much, coming at you. But the way that it was broken up, you could read a little bit at a time and then set it aside, and then come back to it and set it aside. And it made it, big as it is, it made it very easy to read.
I hope so.
I wanted to ask you, like, because I've written some other things, and I've noticed over the years that my relationship to these things I've written in the past, like, continues to change and morph. So obviously, Jane Jacobs is still a huge guiding force in your life. But how has your relationship with Ethics of Beauty changed since it's been published? What was that, 5, 6 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, if I were writing it from scratch, nothing would be the same,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all about what you learn kind of settles within you, and then becomes the platform for the next thing. I was trying to leave a record, in a sense. I was trying to get this book out of the way in a couple of months, and then get on to the main project of my 2014 sabbatical. So I was trying to leave a record of what I thought were the main patterns, and I think that sometimes those get forgotten. And for example, the idea of political philosophy as being really describing a wedding liturgy, or that Holy Week is, a very divine form of that, or the stuff about the potency, quality, and quantity of information in the three kinds of sciences in chapter 8. Like, I just felt those things just had to be in writing somewhere, and let someone else do something with them someday. But in terms of writing, I think the preface is the only part I like.
Oh, I totally sympathize.
Yeah,
I read stuff I wrote and I go, oh, okay.
it's a snapshot of yourself at that
It
age.
really
Yeah,
is, isn't it?
it is.
That
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you're not the same person the moment you finish the book. I mean, of course, it happens along the way too, but it's also you're just a different soul, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
that
move on.
portal
Like you
has
said, you're
closed.
working on
Yeah.
these different projects. You've got a whole different category of thinking. Like, okay, I said that. How are you people still talking about it? I'm over it.
Right.
I mean, I do think like this animal human person thing is really, when I go into church, I try to, you bring different states, let's say, to like a Sunday liturgy, or to I'm on sabbatical now, but tonight I went to Great Vespers on campus, and you bring different internal states, but I do try to do a very Cesar Millan approach. I mean, I just let myself for the first X amount of time really focus on the beauty of the surroundings, pay attention, note the beauty of the music or the incense, or and really just really focus on gratitude and the praise of God. And then I start to pray for the other people in church. And because and start to kind of empathically, with a bit of imagination, imagine that, well, it's easy at a seminary. I mean, I was young once too, and I know that you can have all kinds of questions. And so, so empathically, and the scripture says, if you're on the way to the temple and you remember you have something against your brother, you will leave the offering and go. And it's the same in church, I think. Like, before I dare really to pray, in a sense, I'm praying for those people, and then that becomes prayer for the life of the world. And then now the truth aspect, it's possible to speak to God face to face, and to follow that progression. And I don't think when I wrote the Ethics of Beauty that I was really doing that. I was groping for ideas, but I wasn't thinking, I wasn't seeing how easy it is to apply it just in your Sunday church going.
It's simple. That doesn't make it easy, but it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes I'm a total mess and none of this is happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is really true. I mean, that embodied experience of spirituality, like, we have to do that first. And if we can't get that embodied response to beauty first and foremost, it really doesn't matter what we do with our brains. And that's where the Western tradition and a lot of our peers have it backwards. They want to get it all right up here so that they can finally get to experience beauty.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beauty is the afterthought. Like, yeah, when I get it all finished and get it right, then I'll have time for that, or I'll have the leisure to appreciate it. Thank you for listening to The Diner. If you like what you hear, you may be interested to know that Laura has written a sex ed curriculum for teenagers called Sex Ed for Sane People, and it can be found on her website at lauraewolf.com. You can also find our book, Patterns for Life, an Orthodox reflection on Charlotte Mason education, on Amazon.